Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Asian Vision Dialogue. I'm Sreynou, the host of our program. Today, we are going to have a great discussion on the topic related to the political situation in Myanmar with our guest speaker, Dr. Desmond Molloy. He's an independent political and conflict analyst to join our program today. So, greeting, Dr. Desmond.
Hello, Sreynou. Thank you very much for having me.
So, could you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience?
Yes. Well, briefly, I am Irish and I spent 20 years in the military, including as a UN military observer in Battambang province during UNTAC, where I met a lady 30 years ago, so I have been associated with Cambodia since then. After time with international NGOs across the world and with the UN for 10 years as Chief of Disarmament Programs, DDR, I completed a PhD in Japan and was immediately recruited as the program director for the Nippon Foundation in Myanmar, the first office outside of Japan, where I reported to Yoi Sasagawa-san, the director of the Nippon Foundation, the chairman, and also the special envoy for Japan for reconciliation in Myanmar. So I spent 6 years in that position, and as I completed that position, I took a job with the Asia Foundation in Myanmar for 1 year, and just before the coup in January of last year, I came home to Cambodia. So I've been here teaching in Pannasastra, International Relations and Political Science, also with the Hiroshima Peace Builders Center in Japan, with Tromsø University in Norway, and also associated with the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies in Siem Reap. But I'm primarily here, I think, because of my understanding of the Myanmar environment.
Well, thank you, Dr. Des, for joining us today. And we are so glad to hear your insight and also the assessment around the development of the political situation in Myanmar. So as everyone knows that the 1st February coup d'etat last year, the situation in Myanmar is deeply concerning. And of course, it remains a focus of our attention on the population of the country as well as on the regional stability and peace. So in your opinion, what would be the next solution or next step for Cambodia in the name of the ASEAN chair as well as a neighboring country of Myanmar to deal with the issue?
Well, the Prime Minister Hun Sen has already taken initial action with his early visit in January on a state visit. So from a Cambodian perspective, he went himself to visit Min Aung Hlaing and the SAC, the perpetrators of the coup, I would say. And of course, some people were concerned at this independent visit, as they felt it might have damaged the centrality of ASEAN consensus. But it seems very clear that Hun Sen traveled in January in order to demonstrate his goodwill, to demonstrate his good offices, and to build trust with the SAC and with Min Aung Hlaing. And despite some controversy, and despite coming back without significant progress, he may have laid the foundations for such trust. On the questions of the threat to ASEAN centrality, I think we have seen from the foreign ministers meeting of last month that ASEAN centrality of consensus is strong. And any misunderstanding as a result of the Prime Minister's visit to Myanmar appear to be resolved now. So from my own perspective, I would understand what Hun Sen did when he visited. It's very much on the style of the Japanese approach that I'm familiar with, and that Yoi Sasagawa would have done in going personally to build trust with the protagonists. Now, of course, he did not visit the members of the NUG, who are the shadow government, who are in opposition to the SAC, to Min Aung Hlaing's group. But it seems clear that one government must talk to the de facto authority initially. So I feel that any misunderstanding over that visit is resolved now, and that the ASEAN centrality of consensus is strong.
Well, thank you, Dr. Des. So when we talk about ASEAN centrality, we can see that actually when we want to resolve the crisis in Myanmar, we need a unified stance among ASEAN member states. So in this regard, do you think how can ASEAN ensure the mutual trust, mutual respect and understanding to deal with the issue?
Well, there has been agreement, and as I said, any misunderstanding that might have existed was first addressed in Hun Sen's letter, I think of the 2nd of February, where he explained that he was not challenging the centrality of consensus and that he was abiding by it and that he was in an effort to build trust. And had he come back with some progress, particularly on the 5 principles that had been agreed in April 2001 between ASEAN and Min Aung Hlaing, if he had made progress on any of those 5, there wouldn't have been any question regarding the undermining of the centrality of consensus. However, Min Aung Hlaing is intransigent. Now, ASEAN is consistent in that it says these 5 principles we agreed are sacrosanct. This is the ASEAN position, and until Myanmar makes progress on some of these issues, we will not accept political representation at ASEAN meeting. And this is agreed by the 8 heads of state of ASEAN other than Myanmar. And my own feeling is that particularly since the foreign ministers meeting of last month, there is no question but that ASEAN is unified in its position.
Okay, well, when we talk about the ideas of turning Myanmar into the normalcy or even democracy, it is a wishful thinking. So with regard to this, do you think that the roles of the ASEAN or international community, to what extent does this role can make effective to urge the party to have a ceasefire or what's called peaceful negotiation? Yes.
Well, initially we have a zero-sum option coming from the SAC, from the junta authorities. There will have to be compromise. This zero-sum option is faced with the zero-sum option also from the NUG, excuse me. But until there is compromise, there cannot be progress. So if talking does not begin, there cannot be progress. And ASEAN and the international community, which is backing ASEAN, including China, including the West, are backing ASEAN to make progress on these issues and agrees with ASEAN's position in relation to the 5 principles, the first of which is an immediate ceasefire. We cannot attain a normative environment where the people of Myanmar can start to live a normal life. Now we see at the moment with sanctions and with the civil disobedience movement and with the rise of civil defense activities and military activities, there is continuing savagery, there is continuing war, and we do not see the junta making progress, even militarily, despite its relative strength and the asymmetric environment. I'm from Ireland, where we're very familiar with guerrilla warfare, and we know that in Northern Ireland, about 300 armed IRA men held 30,000 British troops at bay until there was a stalemate and until there was a treaty. I believe that until there is agreement to a ceasefire, it is very difficult to make progress, and the economy of Myanmar will continue to suffer. I think what is highly important is that China take a strong position. China, as the great power with influence over the region, must take a position in relation to a normative environment. Now, whatever about democracy, we saw during the period of the transitional government of Thein Sein, there was a movement towards democracy, and the people of Myanmar were able to advance the economy tremendously as a result of that. I don't expect to see a fully fledged democracy emerge in Myanmar, but until there is a ceasefire, there cannot be progress towards a normative environment. And I believe that the ASEAN position is correct, and it is supported by the international community. And I think Cambodia has made it clear that it hopes to make progress in the 11 or the 10 and a half months remaining. Even if Hun Sen has expressed his frustration, I believe he hopes to make progress on some of the 5 principles.
Well, thank you, Dr. Des. As for the cross-border issue, when we want to talk about the neighboring country, especially Thailand. So from your perspective, what effect, if any, that the Myanmar crisis affect on its neighbor countries such as Thailand?
We're already seeing a significant impact on Thailand, particularly as displaced people within Myanmar, particularly in Kaya State, in Karen State, Cayenne State, as they cross the border into Thailand, they create a refugee crisis that must be addressed by Thailand. There is also the issue in Chin of people escaping into India. And of course, there is the old problem of over 1 million Rohingya refugees who are hosted by Bangladesh. And there will be no resolution to that issue as long as there is ongoing conflict in Myanmar. I think that is one issue. I think the second issue is that humanitarian assistance will be expected to come through Thailand as much contact with the ethnic states has been over the last decades. Humanitarian assistance would be expected to come through Thailand. This will have an impact on Thailand, on India, and then Bangladesh continues to deal with the issue of over 1 million Rohingya refugees. So the conflict has a major impact on the neighbors, and ASEAN will be expected to contribute particularly to the humanitarian effort. And I believe the international community will be ready to come to the assistance of ASEAN in that issue.
Thank you, Dr. Des. So I think, do you have any more additional analysis on the development of the Myanmar situation with regard to the economic or humanitarian assistance?
Well, we see the economy is tanking. I'm in touch with my friends in Yangon. The situation is very seriously bad. We're seeing increasing food insecurity. This is after 10 years of progress and of the development of a normative environment, of the reduction of poverty. We're seeing a return to major poverty and a major humanitarian crisis, including food, health, shelter, insecurity, is being predicted by the United Nations. And without the change in direction by initially the SAC and Min Aung Hlaing, and then with some absence of intransigence coming from the SAC, the NUG, the government, the shadow government, we are heading for a serious humanitarian problem.
So thank you, Dr. Des, for your participation in our program and also the insightful contribution to the program today. Ladies and gentlemen, the Asian Vision Dialogue has now come to an end. Thank you for being with us and see you in the next episode.